Okay, we are doing a little different segment today called Tea and Cookies.
Yep.
Things have been really crazy with this vlog the last 2 or 3 days because of New Year's, and I just put out this like New Year's rewind video that took, geez, I don't know, maybe 12 hours of editing. We're trying out like a new format, and I'd like to do more of these videos, so please let me know what you think in the comments. But we're gonna be doing like a reaction or response to a theological article. I wish I could sell that in a more exciting way. This is like actually an older article. It's from this year, but I was like, this is not gonna work for this vlog. This is gonna be boring. But I couldn't get out of my head. I'm really struggling right now with like, what value do we have in this vlog? What should we be showing? Like us grinding more coffee or us talking more. Some of our viewpoints, especially from our religious background and whatnot, while they're unpopular for certain crowds, it's actually some of those valuable things we have to offer this world. So we're gonna go forward with this. I'm gonna post a link to this article below, but this article is titled, "You Can Forgive Your Parents," which sounds like really nice, but actually like almost the title, when I first hear that, especially when I see like where this is posted, like my little radar go
I'm
up.
already triggered.
I feel like it's already
Preachy.
not preachy, but like
Prescriptive.
no. It's almost like dismissive, like of whatever your feelings or experience are as a child. So, okay, let's get into this article. It starts off, parents are becoming a common scapegoat, at least in many American circles. Listen to people explain their weaknesses and failures in life, and consider how often you hear them blame their parents, directly or indirectly, blatantly or subtly. We've all heard that the sins of the parents are passed down to their children and their children's children. We've also been told over and over again that most of our weaknesses as people can be traced to weaknesses in our parents and their parenting. Okay, so this article is kind of like creating the groundwork and saying that people are blaming their parents, but there's also this like biblical idea that's being tossed in there about generational sin, and we acknowledge that some things actually come from our parents. So then, this is where it gets interesting, I think. It can be healthy to uncover the roots of our specific pains or weaknesses, biological, historical, or otherwise, but true healing will never come from identifying causes or assigning guilt, but from trusting in God. And this is where like my beef with this whole article lies.
Those two things don't need to be exclusive from each other. I think uncovering the roots of where the pain and your weaknesses are coming from and trusting in God, I think both are actually needed to move on.
Yeah.
Find healing.
I totally agree. I think it's that word, but it creates this like, this opposition or this mutual exclusivity. Mm-hmm. Like you have to choose one or the other. You either have to choose to identify causes or assign guilt, mm-hmm. or you have to trust in God. It's
assuming that if you're assigning guilt, you're not trusting in God.
I actually think that belief, the reason why I'm so passionate about this video, sorry, I just had this delicious cookie. I think that belief is actually not just wrong, I actually think it's really counterproductive and destructive to a lot of people.
It's why I believe sins keep getting passed on.
And I actually don't think it's even biblical. We have like the really big picture to look at, like where does sin come from? And the Bible goes through like incredible, I don't know if detail is the right word, but it places this story front and center, like Genesis 2, in terms of like the cosmic story of man. We hear where sin comes from. Like the causes are identified and guilt is assigned. The serpent came down. I don't care if you believe this story or not, like if you think it's literal or figurative or symbolic or whatever, but the serpent came down and through man, sin entered the world. And that's actually really important because if we don't believe that version of the story, we're likely to believe another version of the story, which actually it's confusing even though we know that story. I think a lot of people feel and think that God is the one that introduced sin into the world because he allowed Adam the opportunity, or, you know, there's all these weird deal. But if God introduced sin into the world, into that origin, I think it's less of a reason to trust God. In the Bible, the origin of sin is important and identifying guilt.
I believe God allowed sin, but he didn't like want sin.
The other thing I've learned is that God generally doesn't ask people to just like blindly trust him. In fact, it's why we have scripture, I think, and a lot of these stories where he tells his people, remember, my track record proves myself. I created the world. I took care of you in the desert. I did this, 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 and this. And he repeats it again and again. He writes it down for them. He tells them to remember it and to repeat it. He doesn't say just blindly trust me. And especially for those of us that are raised in religious households, I think we have almost a double challenge here, because it's very confusing for our parents or us as parents to help our children distinguish between what is like God's will and spiritual teaching and what is just kind of like crappy parenting. And we all have both. Like, we have crappy parenting, but like, because I'm like have spirituality also, it's very easy, I think, to confuse my kids and to say like, don't critique that, or you're critiquing God. And I think that's really unhealthy. I think we need to hold that spirituality very loosely and say, I'm doing the best we can, and I believe these things, but what you're seeing might not be these things. It might just be me or my mistakes. So then he goes on to kind of tell this story about Joseph. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, 10 of his brothers, 10 of the people who he should have been able to trust in the world, conspired to kill him and then to sell him into slavery. Perhaps a brother or sister or father or mother could do worse to you, but most of our family members are not capable of horrors like these. So this is like kind of the linchpin to his discussion of this, is this Joseph story. And this feels a little bit weird to me. I don't think the point of this story of Joseph is that he forgave his family. The other thing that's a little weird is I feel like this author is kind of putting this as like, okay, these are the worst things that can happen. You can get sold into slavery, attempted murder, and whatever you've experienced is not as bad as this, so stop your whining. I don't think that's actually a biblical way of seeing history or this story or our lives now. Or
take into account like the unique emotional well-being of each individual. Like, someone could be sinned against much less than in this, but still take it to the point, you know, that it's like as if they like murdered that, you know. Yeah, it's like, oh, you were a little girl, you were just raped. Like, at least you weren't put into slavery for 40 years. Like, so yours thing doesn't matter as much. And history is nice to have a little bit of perspective if you're looking for thankfulness. But to tell someone that their stuff doesn't matter because, hey, well, our grandparents were in a concentration camp and you're not in a concentration camp, so your stuff isn't as big of a deal. I don't know, that doesn't feel right to me. So then he goes through, like, even though Joseph's family put him into slavery and all these things, there's like the story of Joseph getting like rising up in King of Egypt, and then his brothers come back to him for food, and Joseph's next words to them are some of the most amazing, stunning in all of the Bible. It says, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt, and now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. I don't know, I think this is like his like case here. Joseph forgave his family, so we should forgive our family. This quoting of scripture is a little odd to me. I don't know, Joseph like was in a very, very unique story where we have like very insider information into what God's plan is and was, and it was like very unique. So God used this very specific case to carry out probably like the most important story in the entire Hebrew scripture, which is the story of his people going into slavery in the Exodus. And he did some pretty crazy stuff to get there. But I don't know if that really like discounts
what happened to Joseph or how we should really apply that to our lives now. And I guess what I'm saying is, you know, God's plans do not trump the necessity for forgiveness. You know, almost anything that happens as Christians, we have this really weird ability to say, well, it was God's will, obviously, because he is big enough to stop it, and he didn't. So I could like punch Cami in the face, and she'd be like, ouch. And I could be like, what? That was God's will.
Years and years pass, and we have no idea what Joseph went through in his own heart to get to the point where he could forgive his brothers. But I have a hunch, knowing myself, that that was a long road. And it wasn't just like, oh wait, God meant this for good. I can forgive my brothers. I don't think it was that. I don't think it was just like this light switch that went off for him. I think it was like a long road. And at the end of the road, he was able to look back and say, oh, okay, God meant this for good, even though a lot of bad stuff happened to me.
Joseph, believing in God's bigger plan, gave him the fuel to be able to forgive. And this resentment or pain that had built up or could build up from having so many wrongs done against you, it almost needs to be overwhelmed by something bigger.
Yeah.
And that something bigger for Joseph, first of all, I mean, he was in some crazy situations where he got promoted to like the #1 or 2 guy in the entire nation of Egypt. Okay, so this is like not a normal story, first of all. Like you become like the president of the whole like world superpower. Things get proven again and again and again that God is behind you. I mean, I don't know how it would have ended differently if Joseph would have just like died in the pit. If he'd be like, yeah, cool guys, God wanted that to happen. So it goes on. 17 years later, their father Jacob died. The brothers feared Joseph might finally get his revenge against them. In their minds, he was still right to seek retribution despite the forgiveness and kindness he had extended to them. And then it says, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. And then he like says this thing again. You know, this is like the Uber sideline comment. True healing will never come from assigning guilt, but from trusting God. I don't know. I just feel like this is really unnecessarily adversarial. With God, he doesn't like overlook things that go wrong. That's not a correct viewpoint of what forgiveness is or how God operates or even how he trains us to operate, I don't think. It's not very consistent with scripture. I mean, there's I think it's a G.K. Chesterton quote, or C.S. Lewis, one of those famous guys. He says, forgiveness was a problem even for God. You know, God is extremely consistent. It's why he had to like step down into earth and die. He couldn't just say like, oh, sin, like no big deal. That's why Aslan, you know, in the story of the Chronicles of Narnia, he like has to die too. And you find that he doesn't just like, he could have beat the White Witch and all these little, you know, bad guys, but he actually had to appease the deeper magic, is what C.S. Lewis called it, which means he had to play by his own rules within this game. And I feel like in a way, what we should be doing in equipping ourselves is not saying, oh, that forgiveness thing is like no big deal, but actually we have to learn how to acknowledge and move past that type of pain. I feel like it's really unfortunate that Christians have positioned themselves historically and now against things like mental health. It's like, oh, you can believe Christianity or mental health. I mean, I think about Christianity's relationship with science for the last 500 years. And in the beginning, science was like discovering stuff. And Christianity is like, oh no, if you believe, you can believe that the earth is round or the center of the universe or Christianity. And it's like, no, it shouldn't be either or. It's just that science, it's just science, you know, it's
like a tool.
It's a
to
tool.
help you.
It's never going to be as big as faith or spirituality or Christianity, but that doesn't make it false. And I think in the same way, mental health and the observations and things we can learn in it, it can be a tool. It's there. And Christianity doesn't make it so that that's not true. It just makes it so that we don't have to stop there. We can actually move beyond the acknowledgement that, yeah, there is pain and there is hurt and there are things that really need forgiveness.
I grew up with some family members of mine would say kind of these like mantras where it was just like, trust in God and be thankful, and those were supposed to like take care of all of the feelings, the icky feelings that you have, whether it be toward your parents or towards siblings or whatever. That's not actually really dealing with the deep problems that our hearts have with either what was done against us or some loss that we have. And so when he says, trust God, I feel like that's just like kind of this mantra, like everything will take care of itself if you only just trust God. I don't think that God ever intended us to just say, trust God, as if they're these magical words that just take care of everything. I actually think trusting God is actually really, really difficult. And it's not something you can just say. And in order to like actually trust God, you actually have to deal with stuff. Okay, this came from there, and okay, that's a bummer, and I feel really sad about this, or I feel really angry about this, and actually like feel those feelings. They don't just disappear when you say, trust God.
Because in a way, like, God didn't die for some general people group and some general wrongs. I mean, he did also, but those things that we have wronged against us in our childhood, he actually died for those things. And the things that we will do even against our own kids. So why not acknowledge those things? In a way, this is like the best teaching tool to teach our kids or ourselves why we even need Jesus anyways. That's why it's so weird that Christians are like fighting against that type of relationship with information.
Like they're gonna get like found out and something really bad's gonna happen to them.
Yeah, I feel like Christians actually believe that we're better than other people. Yeah. So we don't want to address guilt or like make a mistake of saying something's wrong. But this statement, true healing will never come from assigning guilt, I completely disagree with that. I think true healing will never come from only assigning guilt, if that's all you're willing to do. But I don't think it's an un-Christian thing to assign guilt. The Bible is clear, we are not the ultimate judge. So if we position ourselves that way, and if we're accusing others of more guilt than ourselves, that's like an un-Christian belief that Jesus really cautioned people against. But just saying like, hey, I did that, I'm wrong. Or you did that to me, that's wrong. That's actually like the basis of forgiveness. And I guess maybe that's, you know, something that has helped me understand this concept, is understanding what forgiveness even is. So like if I hit Cammie, I have like a debt incurred against her. Now she has two choices. One is to make me pay it, which would be like hitting me back, or the other is to pay it herself. And that means every time she wants to hit me or she wants to be angry, she actually like chooses not to. She actually is assigning guilt. She's saying, I was hit. I shouldn't have been hit. I didn't deserve to be hit. That hurt. Ouch. That sucks. Those are like realities that are okay. And somebody's like, oh, no, okay, no big deal. That wasn't a thing. You know, no, it was a thing. Or at least I
didn't have Tommy's parents. It's like, well.
Or at least I wasn't in Auschwitz. The article goes on. Christian, your parents did not get in the way of God's plan for you. They were God's plan for you. Can you look back at your life with Joseph and say that? Ultimately, my parents did not send me here. God sent me here. Whatever my parents meant for me, God meant it for good. He did, he is, and he will in every hardship and every relationship. Okay, that's cute. That's like completely unapplicable to navigating a lot of relationships. If I just punch Cammie in the face and she says, huh, that's God's plan for me, that actually is not helpful to her or to me. Now on some level I get it. Like our worldview dictates that yes, like God is big enough to allow what happens to us. But for our relationship to get better, if actually Cammie actually loves me, I think she's actually not gonna just ignore that happened. That's like not, a Christian response is not just denying reality. Joseph did not live for his brother's apologies. Their sins against him did not hold him captive all those years, refusing to let him move on. He knew
First of all, how do we know that? We don't know that.
He knew the horrors of captivity well, but he was free from bitterness and resentment, even while his brothers were silent about their guilt. Don't wait for your parents to apologize before you exercise the freedom Christ has already purchased for you. Some of this, like, I'm okay with. If you just obsess and blame your entire life, like, that's a sucky way to go through life. But there's a difference between acknowledging and obsessing.
Mm-hmm. The ironic thing is I think when you don't acknowledge, you end up just obsessing maybe on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
If these things don't just go away with trusting God.
Yeah, and I think that's really where the science of some mental health that's completely like secular, whatever that means, or worldly, Christians or the faith could really benefit a lot from. Because I feel like in a way we have kind of our heads in the sand, like Cami said, with these like kind of like rote mantras we say, which is essentially like a good luck talisman. It's like, it's no different from, it's not real faith in God. It's just like you're saying something to make yourself feel better. There's not much depth to it. It doesn't really address or change reality.
Right.
It's just a coping mechanism. One thing we've learned from our counseling time, our counselor said that thing, he said, you know, we don't know much in this field, but we know whatever you don't pass backwards in terms of assigning blame, you're gonna take forward. If you don't say to your parents or about your parents, you don't have to say, go tell this to them, but if you don't come to believe at some point, hey, that thing that happened was wrong and it impacted me, then it's still gonna have power in your life. Whether you choose to acknowledge that or not, it doesn't matter. And you're actually gonna be passing that on to the next generation until you break the cycle. But breaking this cycle needs to have some sort of acknowledgement or assessment. Otherwise, we repeat what we know. So that's what is frustrating me about this, is I actually want to see real spiritual change happen. And I don't think it happens from ignoring the truth, ever. Sorry if this was a little long. I would love to hear in the comments 2 things. One is, have you guys experienced this, especially for those of you that are maybe in like some religious circles where there's like an adversarial relationship to mental health or other things in that category? And the second thing is, was this type of video helpful, seeing a reaction to an article of this nature? Thanks guys, we'll see you guys tomorrow.